dapat segera menempati tempat duduk yang telah. Jadi Bapak Ibu yang telah hadir boleh mengisi bangku yang paling depan dulu Bapak Ibu. Ini yang paling depan, jadi nanti yang datang belakangan bisa langsung isi yang di belakang. Kami ingatkan agar dapat mengubah telepon selulernya ke dalam mode silent atau gentar. Good morning and welcome to all participants. Please register before and take your seat. To all participants, as long as the event today, please change your mobile phone to silent mode. Good morning and welcome to Professor Peter Kelly, Emeritus Professor, Oxford University, Bapak Irawan Santoso Suryo Basuki SS, Peneliti Pusat Riset Masyarakat dan Budaya yang akan menjadi moderator hari ini, dan juga kepada Bapak Ibu hadirin yang hadir menghadiri ruangan acara hari ini. Acara akan kita mulai sekitar pukul 9.45 sambil menunggu Kepala Pusat Riset Masyarakat dan Budaya. Bagi Bapak Ibu yang belum melakukan registrasi, kami ingatkan kembali untuk dapat melakukan registrasi terlebih dahulu.
Selamat pagi semuanya. Selamat pagi Pak Riwanto. Pak Peter
Ya,
sudah hadir
Pak
bersama
Lilis.
kita di sini, Pak.
Oke. Ya, very welcome.
Oh, iya.
Selamat pagi, Pak
Selamat pagi, Pak Peter ya. Pagi.
Terima kasih atas join
Iya,
di Zoom
iya.
di Malang.
Oke. Iya, Pak Peter, selamat ini.
Ya. Oke.
Iya.
Kita akan mulai meet ya, Pak. Oke. Mungkin ada gangguan jaringan.
Oh, ya.
Rasanya nge-freeze ya.
Ini ya, saya harus satu familiar.
Ada pisangnya beli. Pisang. Pepaya. Pepayanya. Tes, tes, tes. Tes, tes, tes.
Selamat datang juga kami ucapkan kepada Bapak Ibu hadirin dan para Zoom. Mohon ini acara akan segera dilakukan sekitar 5 menit.
Ya,
Segera kita mulai. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Good morning and welcome to everyone in public lecture, challenges and opportunities to the research culture, support by Research Center for Society and Culture, Research Organization for Social Sciences and Humanities, National Research and Innovation Agency. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you for taking the time to attend this event. It's such an honor to be the master of ceremony for this event. My name is Renti and I'm excited to be hosting it. Ladies and gentlemen, the public lecture will go into session. First is presentation and the second is discussion session. Acara ini juga dihadiri oleh Bapak Ibu tamu undangan yang melalui Zoom selain offline di ruang seminar hari ini. Kami ucapkan juga kepada Bapak Ibu yang telah bergabung melalui Zoom dan Bapak Ibu yang telah bergabung secara offline di ruangan hari ini. Yang terhormat Kepala Organisasi Riset, yang terhormat Kepala Pusat Riset Masyarakat dan Budaya, Ibu Lilis Mulyani, yang kami hormati Bapak Peter Carey, Emeritus Professor Oxford University, yang kami hormati Bapak Irawan Santoso Suryo Basuki, peneliti Pusat Riset Masyarakat dan Budaya. dan juga para tamu undangan serta hadirin yang berbahagia. Sebelum kita memulai kepada acara yang pertama, kita akan menyanyikan bersama lagu Indonesia Raya. Bapak Ibu dimohon berdiri. Terima kasih, hadirin dipersilakan duduk kembali. Pada baiknya sebelum kita memulai acara hari ini, kita berdoa bersama-sama menurut keyakinan dan kepercayaan masing-masing. Berdoa dimulai. Berdoa selesai. Baik, Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, memasuki acara yang pertama, yaitu sambutan dan pembukaan dari Kepala Pusat Riset Masyarakat dan Budaya kepada Ibu Lilis Mulyani. Kami persilakan. Terima kasih. Good morning, Assalamualaikum, Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Honorable Professor Peter Carey, who have joined us today here at PDD Green, Dr. Riwanto Tirto Sudarmo, my colleague Dr. Prina Fitri, Head of Research Center for Education, Ibu Dr. Melanie Budianta has joined us via Zoom. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here today to welcome you all to this distinguished international lecture with Professor Peter Carey on nurturing research culture. As an integrated government research institution, BRIN is facing an enormous challenge to nurture research culture. Coming from different ministries and 5 largest government research institutions, researchers now working under BRIN have different expertise, backgrounds, and research cultures of their previous institutions. Some may find it alien to the rigorous academic processes, academic culture with strict academic ethics. Some may not have similar passion or even the slightest idea of being a researcher, except as a form of government official type of function, or consider it as a similar job as other administrative work. As part of academic community, researchers have distinct work ethics, characters, and cultures.
That is why, after continuous discussion with Dr. Riwanto Tirta Sudarmo, our senior, our mentor, we find similar topic that needs to be continuously discussed: how to build and nurture research culture. I'm very excited to hear that Professor Terry will share with us about this topic. As part of the brain structure, I find it challenging not only to nurture but to create and build a foundation of a research culture based on shared vision and views of our researchers as part of the scientific community. I am aware that research culture is built from individuals from scientific characters or scientific temper. To build and nurture a community of science starts from each one of us. Each of the individuals set awareness that we are part of the larger scientific community. We have to be aware that we are scientists, not administrators and not bureaucrats. Once we understand ourselves, it is the time when we know how to better contribute for science, for the society, and for our country. I would like to thank again Professor Tirta Carey and Pak Riwanto who made this event possible, and also to Mbak Halimah Satria and PMB staff, Budi, Bu Medi, Bu Titin, Pak Cecep, Purus, Damar, Felani, Luis, Aya, and also Mas Irawan, who have helped behind the scene and who also helped here today with us. Last but not least, I would like to also thank you to everyone who attending this lecture, joining in person here at PDDI Green Science Area of Kota Surabaya, Jakarta, and to those joining us virtually. I wish we have an insightful lecture and discussion. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum. Shalom. Om Santi Satyo.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi Sumayani. Ladies and gentlemen, now for the presentation and discussion session will moderate by Irawan Santoso Budi Basuki as a researcher of Research Center for Society and Culture. Bu Bapak Irawan Santoso Suryo Basuki, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Selamat pagi. Welcome to the International Public Lecture organized by Research Center for Society and Culture. Thank you very much for coming. Even though I know that you have really tight schedules, also near approaching deadlines, so we really appreciate your attendance here both online and also offline. My name is Irawan, so it's my pleasure to be the moderator of this event. The topic for this lecture is about challenges and opportunities to nurture the research culture. Probably before we go or move forward to nurture the research culture itself, probably share one indication that could be us. Do we have that kind of culture? Because when I was writing the topic, I remember Floris Cohen. He is a Dutch historian of science. He argues in his book, The Scientific Evolutions, the historical inquiry. He argues that there are only two civilizations in the world that are without completely without science. First is Rome, second is each in his archipelago. He said that in 1994. So then also I found quite interesting articles wrote by his fellow historian, also a Dutchman. He wrote an article, why were they called Japanese Galileo? Kenapa tidak ada Galileo dari Jawa? So the context is 19th century, and it's all about how they perceive or see stars, or we call it now astronomy. So in conclusions, the conclusion says that he didn't find any that particular culture, or who really says that scientific temper in Japanese people at that time. So they approach their surroundings more philosophical, more critical, instead of logical and So this is probably a question that can be elaborated more by Pak Peter. So you may already know, so we are humbled and honored today that we will have Pak Peter Gary, a prominent historian, a well-respected intellectual. He probably the very first persons that we can remember if we want to talk about Pangeran Diponegoro. We will not talk about Pangeran Diponegoro, but later on. So he is an emeritus fellow at Trinity College in UK, and then visiting fellow, visiting professor at the Department of Humanities, University of Indonesia. He has a long list of publications, but I think the most famous in Indonesia is about Pangeran Diponegoro. The Power of Prophecy, Prince Diponegoro and the End of an Old Order in Java, 1785 until 1855, that has been translated by KPG into Indonesian under the title Kuasa Ramalan, Pangeran Diponegoro dan Akhir Tatanan Lama di Jawa 1775 sampai dengan 18. Pak Peter also wrote a lot of articles and books about East Timor and also Burma. But I think the latest one is authoring an article with Iwanto, which published last year, 2022, in Asia Major. Yeah, it's about Indonesia 2019 until 2022. The authoritarian term as a lead motif in President Jokowi's second term. So I think that's probably the main question, Pak Peter, yang mungkin bisa dielaborasi lebih jauh about do we have this kind of scientific temper before we know that temperature will contribute something. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Peter Gary. Thank you so much.
Terima kasih dalam ini speaker. Ini sesuatu yang sangat spesial bagi saya. Persis 50 tahun sejak saya pertama kali diajak kepada DIP bulan Maret 73 untuk membicarakan tiga lambang wayang dan Goro, dan waktu itu saya jumpa dengan Mas Margono. Baru dibuat satu memoir yang ini dari sekarang karena menjadi tiga sama. Ya. Saya sebenarnya sudah berapa tahun ya, 75 tahun. Tidak dapat apa di manusia jadi menjelang seperti dan buka lawan ini mati seperti ya dari Goro dan Makassar dia 70 tahun sudah memiliki keluarga Jawa, dia sudah memberi instruksi mengenai bagaimana Kristen yang harus dimakamkan dengan dia seperti itu. Wah, dan dia juga membujuk otoritas Hindia Belanda supaya mereka membangun satu villa dan di sini lain. Dan dia juga memilih tempat mana dia akan membangun juga sebab itu tempat apakah ini mau dalam bahasa Indonesia atau mau dalam bahasa Inggris?
Inggris saja Pak, biar latihan.
So, please forgive me because there are many things I don't know, and many things which you can instruct me on. Yeah, nurturing research. I first wrote this as a reflection on why Indonesia not won Nobel Prize. Of course, Indonesia did win a Nobel Prize. It won a Nobel Prize in 1929 because it's given to a guy, Christian Island. but all his pioneering work was done here in Batavia at the Ganescoli Military Ganescoli Laboratorium, military medical lab, which became in 1916 the Microbiological Institute for the Netherlands Indies, and then in 1930, after his Nobel Prize, it became the Eichmann Institute. So he actually pioneered the pioneering science of vitamins in diet was found, discovered, and developed here in the Netherlands Indies. So it's nonsense to say it's separated without science. You go back to Sulawesi Selatan, there was a Bugis bangsawan who already had astrolabes and was involved with the scientific revolution, very, very keen to equal. I think you have to ask yourself, was there an agenda on the part of the Dutch not to allow the Netherlands Indies to participate in that? If you cast your mind back to 1949, when you had the independence, there wasn't a single factory here in the Netherlands, and there wasn't a single university in Sudan. You look at the 1.6 million to 16 million people, 10% of the population spoke English, and it was night and day compared to the situation here. That's like 32 graduates of tertiary institutions in the humanities and 80,000 graduates of schools, RBS, who were taught in Dutch. Yeah. So this is a very tiny percentage of the population, and the Warisan colonial was extremely thin. Yeah. There was a paternalistic, patriarchal attitude on the part of the Dutch. And you compare that, say, with the way in 300 years of Sunday school in the Philippines, 200 years on Spanish, and 50 years on the Americans. Very different situations. Different too, I think, in we have the S20 starting this week. The goal setting of that would be English, and that's basically a soft power expert. Yeah, you go back 200 years, English was not a language, the international language. When the Congress of Vienna took place, it was French, and in an earlier report, in the ladies, Latin. That was the way people corresponded. Rather they corresponded with other figures of lessons. They corresponded with them. Okay. So so I'm going to just run through these slides very quickly. There are a lot which is not correct in these slides. There's a lot which is very controversial. There's a lot which is height. So somehow one can have that in artwork. The way I deliver this is put on house, mark and society and nothing down and next slide. So the Nobel Prize was
maybe
at the turn of the last century by Sir Alfred Nobel, who made a whole shitload of money out of the discovery of dynamite. And dynamite was very important in the mining industry. So he became super rich, but he also So the Nobel Prize was set up at the turn of the last century by Sir Alfred Nobel. And he and his brother discovered dynamite, which was an extremely powerful explosive that was used very extensively in the mining industry, particularly in South Africa. He became enormously wealthy, but he had another side, a bit like Newton, who basically did his physics, but also wrote commentaries on the patristic studies. He was also bedeviled to some extent by the sort of Nordic gods. He was very much aware that a bit like Oppenheimer in the new film which is going to come out about the bomb, that he had discovered something which was both productive but very destructive. And he wanted to leave a bequest to humanity to honor members of humanity who had brought the greatest benefit to humankind in the previous year. And it started with physics, with chemistry, with medicine, which was then called physiology, and literature, and peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Yeah. So basically, these were the first 5. And in 1970, with money from the Swedish Reserve Bank, the National Bank of Sweden, a 6th prize was set up, which was the prize in economics, Nobel Prize in economics. So we've had about 900, nearly 1,000 honorams since it was first given in the early 1900s, 1903, I think. And it was suspended during the Second World War. Many have been imprisoned, like Karl von Ossietzky, who was the Nobel Prize winner in the 1930s, who was under sanction. Similarly with Russians who have won the Nobel Prize, Solzhenitsyn, Sakharov, and also people from the PRC, you know, so people, and also my friend Aung San Suu Kyi, you know, they were either under house arrest or in prison when they received. Next slide. So maybe this is apropos of nothing, really, but if you look at the 10 largest countries in the world, all of them, with the partial exception of Brazil, where it had half a Nobel. So Peter Merware, who was a very famous immunologist who worked and won his prize as a researcher at the Western Oxford, was born and brought up a Brazilian. He was a Brazilian citizen, and he renounced his citizenship at the age of 18 to avoid doing military service under a then military regime in Brazil. But if you look at China, it's got 9. If you look at India, it's got 12. The United States, it's got over half, here 403. Indonesia 0, Pakistan 2, Abdul Salam physics, and Malala Yousafzai for peace. Nigeria, Warrior Soyinka for literature. Russia 32, and Mexico 3. So maybe it's moot and germane to ask why. Yeah. It's going to go down. Yeah. Next slide. As I said in the lead and the preamble, you did. I mean, although he was Dutch, he was spent much of his adult life in Cilacap and Sebenarnya in North Sumatra, and then he came back. He had to be invalided out, it's got tropical malaria, went back to the Netherlands in the 1890s, and came back here as the head of the RS Militaire Laboratorium. And his pioneering work, and it was quite Kabatula, yeah, it was quite Alain-Provis, many of the greatest discoverers. Piccoli, who discovered the enzyme ring, would work with his students in the laboratorium all day, and then he would invite them back to his house, array them in front of the fire after a good dinner and say, now we must treat. So there is a synergy between research and the type of precision which you do as a researcher. God doesn't play dice with the universe, as Einstein says. So you've got to be correct, you've got to be continuous, you've got to get the facts right. You're a historian, you double check all the references. But also there is an aspect to the human psyche, being, soul, which is essentially one which is of imagination, speculation, and eureka moments, mystical insight. The Carnivorous Quartet was as a myst, yeah. And if you remember Karl Rahner, he was the greatest Jesuit theologian of the 20th century. His parting words were that the future of humanity will be mystical, or it will be nothing. Yeah? So that the ability to develop that side to humanity and to align that, to have between the psyche and the intellect, between logic and imagination, between mysticism and the material world, there has to be a synergy. And my belief, I mean, if you look at Martin Lewis's book, you know, all sorts of Chela and Lucia and Malaysia, the one Chela which is certainly not there is the fact that you are a Lucia Sini, Homo ingenium. You know, you're not communists, you're not like the Japanese, you're not like the Chinese, you're not like the Malays, copying and basically plundering other people's insights in the artistic realm. And that was very clear when you invited Rabindranath Tagore, the great Bengali poet, here in the late 1920s. He was a guest of Budi and he was taken around Java to Laos and Kamicheto and Paratara and Kambana and Borobudur and all the great monuments. And he said, I see India everywhere, but nowhere do I recognize. You have taken the Indian impetus through the Brahmanical presence here in the Majapahit and Srivijayan era, and like in The Tempest, you turned it into something rich and strange. Yeah? You had an impetus, but you didn't just slavishly follow that impetus. It became here something quintessentially Javanese or quintessentially Lamban in terms of Srivijaya. And this was one of the great, after Nalanda, the second Nalanda of the universe was actually in Sumatra. You know? And you had with Majapahit and pre-colonial Indonesia, many things which were pretty remarkable. Jayavarman VII, his vision was of almost a welfare state. Any member of that kingdom could put his hand on a way station and no way he could get help. He could get food, he could get medical. Next slide. So Eichmann's eureka moment came because working at the laboratory, the military laboratory, he kept chickens for experimentation. The chickens were fed military rations, which were polished white rice. And one day, the chickens began to get really ill. Yeah? A lack of iron deficiency. And the cook in the laboratories got more and more fed up and said, why should we be giving these really nice military rations to chickens? So one day the cook abolished military rations and just flung out unpolished rice. And suddenly, within 3 weeks, the chickens had recovered. Yeah? No longer suffering from beriberi, or the avian equivalent of beriberi, but basically had recovered. So the initial thought was that this is in a sort of viruses and miasma, beriberi, rickets disease. But in fact, that event caused Christian Eichmann to then investigate, and he saw that there was a sort of a silver grey skin over the rice, and that silver grey skin was then analyzed and it contained vitamin B. Yeah. So that was the first insight into, and it came about a bit like penicillin, where something was just left out on the windowsill. Suddenly, a culture of penicillin with Fleming in Oxford could be developed. So you need to be surprised by joy. You need to be surprised. You need to have eureka moments in your life. You know? It's not all slogging away in the laboratory. It's also dreaming. It's also being prepared for something that comes all the left field. So it went to a Dutchman, but most of his teams were actually Pribumi. There were inlanders, they were Indonesians. And one of the most brilliant Indonesians was West Sumatran by the name of Ahmad Mokhtar. Hold out your hands and be honest. Who in this audience has heard have heard of him? Know about him? Know about his work? Know about his class? Yeah. Here is someone who walked a narrow path, the narrow path of scholarship. And he was like that, orang Serbia. When I met online, Brother Marcin Margono, he gave me this book. And in this book, there is an interesting insight into nurturing a culture of research. And he wrote, Stovia, unlike the law faculty and unlike Austria's, was an institute for the poor. The poorest people in the Netherlands Indies to become doctors. Pitoman Kusumo, who came from Ambarawa, was not rich. These were not the sons and daughters of the and so on. These were people who came the hard way, and they were given scholarships. It was, however, an institute which over the years, and it opened in the mid-1890s and became on a par with what the type of medical degree you do in Utrecht or in Amsterdam in the 1899, 4 years. It produced a class of Indonesians which, over the years, belonged to the outstanding sons and daughters of this nation. I am not a chauvinist. Serbia maybe cannot compare to Leiden, Harvard, and the Sorbonne. But without prejudice to those whose names I can't remember, they produced a class of medical men in Indonesia, specialists from who were not inferior specialists from all over the world. Yeah? And these people, Abu Rifai and Pitoman Kusumo, someone like Dr. Sitanara, who's a pioneer in leprosy research, they could hold their heads high. When they go to the S-20, the equivalent of the S-20 in the pre-First World War years, they were not second to Indian physicians or to physicians in the Netherlands. Someone like Chitto was also a person of enormous courage. When the plague occurred in Malang, he actually went into the houses. None of the Dutch doctors dared to go into the plague areas. And he actually went in, saved lives, and he actually brought out a young girl he adopted from Malang. Yeah. So that there is a line to scholarship. There is also an element of empowerment. Yeah. With Mokhtar, he was not involved with the very research, but he actually, at the age of 36, defended a thesis in Amsterdam, which proved the origins of the leptospirosis origins of yellow fever. Yeah. I went to school, I went to one of the great public schools, Winchester, but we didn't have a swimming pool. We swam in the river, Itchy, in a bathing pool, in Bromley downtown. Yeah. And my parents had to sign a document saying, Sumpamanya, Peter meninggal dari leptospirosis, kamu tidak akan menuntut sekolah. Yeah, you've been warned. Leptospirosis is from the urine of rats. Yeah, and it's a killer. You know, various Nazis who took refuge on the rat train in Rome and started swimming in the Tiber died of leptospirosis in 1945. Yeah, so with Amar Mokhtar, he defended this in Amsterdam at the age of 36. And when the Japanese struck against the Netherlands Indies in 1942, he became the first head, the first Pribumi head, the first Indonesian head of the Eichmann Institute. And he was a brilliant scientist, but he was also a very brave man, and very courageous, a chevalier sans fleur et sans reproche, like the Chevalier Bayard. And during the war, he had to tread a very difficult line with the Japanese, with the medical services of the Japanese. Sebab mereka memburu-buru mendapat salah satu pencoblosan di dalam tetanus was a killer. It created lockjaw and created a situation in which within 24 hours, someone who was infected with tetanus would die in agony. Yeah. And what the Japanese did towards the end of the war in 1944 was to inject 200 Ramusha in Kender, which is between Jatinagara and Bekasi, in the Ramusha camp in Kender with a experimental tetanus vaccine, which was actually developed against horse tetanus. And Mokhtar was phoned up in the Icahn Institute, which was then in Jalan Merdeka, which is now the, sorry, what wasn't in Jalan Merdeka, this way it was taken, but he was phoned up at the Icahn Institute, and he was told, come post haste to Kender. He entered Kender to a nightmare scene in which 200 Ramusha were dying before his eyes. And he was very, very perceptive, recipient, very sapiently prosecuted. And what he did was to take a little bit of skin of an arm of all the victims, be able to see what had been injured. Is this Piratula or is it something Sengaja? This is the book about Mokhtar, which is called War Crimes in Japanese Indonesia, a case of murder by medicine. Yeah. So this was a war crime. The people who first actually were involved with that war crime were Japanese. Of research. Shukna, who is one of the greatest microbiologists of his age, was his supervisor. 36, he had the world in front of him. He proven the origins of yellow fever. You've given a great boon to West Africa, where yellow fever is endemic, and yet he's not been honoured. If he had lived, if there had been no Japanese here, he would have won a Nobel Prize in Physiology after, and you would have had a golden age for the Icahn Institute. So basically, Kamalot Sujara has dealt you a pretty dreadful hand. Yeah, you had the Japanese, you then had all the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune of the Dutch trying to get back here after earning $11 trillion just from the Culturestelsel, and then in the 1950s. South Maluku, all the problems of trying to regain West Irian, DII, Darul Islam in Sudanese areas of West Java and in South Sulawesi, and the Paramesa and the PRRI in Sumatra. So you've been victims of global politics. You've been victims of global politics in the 18th and early 19th century, when you were part of the First World War, in my view, the Napoleonic Wars. You had no say in that. And you became a victim of the fratricidal conflicts of the Europeans in the 20th century. fascism and communism in the 20th century. And then after your independence, the Oman Ambingkan oleh perandingin so I think you ought to go to the bar of the world and menuntut. You ought to ask $11 trillion back from the Dutch. Yeah, all my education was paid for because my father had the opportunity at the age of 21 to sail down the sea from Liverpool, where he was born and brought up. My grandfather was the registrar of the University of Liverpool, and to become involved in the rice trade of Burma. Burma then exporting 4 million tons of rice every year. And my education at Winchester was paid for out of the profits of the colonial childhood. Yeah. So don't think it's a zero-sum game. Yeah. It's basically you've been taken to the cleaners and you need to menuntut. Your loyalty is with the global south, it is not with the development. Yeah. And that was already underscored in Bandung in the Asia-Africa conference. Yeah. So don't be declabbery oleh orang Amerika. Don't be declabbered oleh orang Chinese who built a high-speed railway to Bandung and it cost you $8 billion. And it's for 2 months, if you're going to move your capital, you don't need a high-speed train. And anyway, you leave at 5 o'clock in the morning, drive to Bandung, and you're there for breakfast. Even from Klossok, Basaya. Okay, we go on to the next slide. So I think you've got a research culture. You can go back to the pre-war time research culture. We go on to the next slide.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Transmission problem.
It's here on mine.
So besides research, there's also the issue of how you export your soft power. I am exporting soft power as I do. In the 16th century, when Malacca was conquered by the Portuguese, it had 300,000 people. It was 6 times as large as London. Yeah. In 1825, when the Java War broke out, 33% of world GDP was generated by one Asian country, China. 24% by India. When the British left India in 1947, it was 2% world GDP. Yeah. So there is a form of immiserization. Yeah. But since I think you can actually punch above your weight. Britain, when it was at the epicenter of its commercial power, which I placed between 1780 and 1830, when the British came here in a short-lived interregnum, had in Britain itself 8 million people. With Ireland, it had about 14 million, but Ireland was in the sense it was the first colony. So a tiny island nation was able to punch far above its weight. And that continued to resonate until the Falklands War, when under the Reagan administration, the United States administration had to choose between 2 allies, Galtieri in Argentina or Mrs. Thatcher in the UK. And basically, because of Britain's ability to actually punch its weight diplomatically and in terms of connections, it flung its logistical power and its political and diplomatic power behind Britain's task force, which regained the Malvinas. So, if you look back to the 14th of August, 1947, came just after Operation Product, where all your most valuable, productive lands were taken in the first Dutch peace action. Bung Kecil, Sharia, went to the UN and addressed the UN Assembly. He addressed the 11 members of the Security Council, who really believed what the Dutch told them. The Dutch were there, seated as a narasumber, interlocutor valid at the Security Council. And basically they're saying that these are a bunch of hooligans who have been, dirakit, Indonesia dirakit oleh orang Jepang, it's a rakitan. Tidak ada makna, tidak ada sesuatu yang betul-betul berbobot bagi Indonesia, itu sesuatu rakyat. And Bung Kecil Darah had a very difficult time as the foreign minister of this country. Speaking in flawless English, he spoke not long, about 40 minutes, but he went back. He was a politician. He studied, I think, law, or he certainly wasn't trained as a historian, but he went back to Srivijaya Majapahit, and he basically, in his speech, convinced the 11 members of the Security Council that the Dutch were lying. Basically, bohong belaka. People were not welcoming the Dutch back. This was a complete act of hooliganism on the part of The Hague, to try and regain. And India Valora Ramswood border. If you lose the Indies, all hell will break loose in terms of the domestic economy, which was cuckoo, because at that time they were discovering immense natural wealth under the North Sea, LNG, and joining the EU, which made Holland's position, economic position, basically, it was nonsense to say that 16% of your GDP was coming from the Northern Indies. But when Bung Kecil went there, he actually was able to convince people that the Indonesians, they needed to be heard. You need your voice heard in the world. People are not going to come along and say, let me help you. You have to pull your boots up by your bootstraps. You have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. In 1949, when you became independent, South Korea was much poorer. It was in the middle of the Civil War. It was put under, and yet now it's the 9th richest economy in the world. Put it in perspective, if California declared independence, it would be now the 9th richest economy. One state of the Union, within 6 months of Pearl Harbor, was producing more war material for the American economy than the whole of Imperial Japan. That was California. So you have to put it in perspective. But basically, one of the themes of this talk is about soft power, how you develop it, how you export it, what its benefits are. Soft power is diplomacy. Soft power is culture. Soft power is language. Soft power is the fact that you already made these connections with Bob Zulik at wherever you go to university in Boston or in New England, and you can ring him up and say, we've got a problem. Like your finance minister, who basically, went and taught in the Midwest, the Young University in Chicago, or she's knocked around, and she was the deputy head of the World Bank. You need these connections. You need powerful friends. Next slide. Next slide. Great. So soft power. Well, here you have John Finnis, who is this is not John Finnis, this is Aung San Suu Kyi, receiving a prize in 2012. But she was orbited by an Oxford law professor, international law, John Finnis, who wrote to the Nobel Prize Committee in Oslo, saying, how about mencalonkan Aung San Suu Kyi? She's now a fallen idol, but at that time, the soft power of Oxford, the soft power of the bien-pensant figures within the legal community in the world were able to orbit Burma, which was a former British colony, using English as a default setting, in order to, in 1990, I think, immediately after the Dalai Lama, to get a Nobel Prize. And that made her an icon. She's now a fallen icon. I had a very interesting experience, a real experience, in Stockholm, where 5 days in Clichy, 3 years, I ran a wallpaper shop. And one day in October 2014, when the first wave of the Rohingya issue was dawning here, we had a sort of, like a tornado, a sort of very violent storm towards Maghreb. And I was just about to send my staff home and say, beat the rain, when under the eaves of my shop came someone with a very powerful motorbike with a butcher puck, and Jenal, who was my assistant at the shop, said, "Come, invite him in, yeah, to shelter from the rain." So I invited him in, and then he plucked at my sleeve and said, "Look on his hip," and he had a Glock 17 semi-automatic pistol on his thigh. So I said, "Baba, I'm very happy to offer you shelter and offer you something warm to drink, but it's not the norm for me in England to be playing host to someone who is armed in my shop. What is going on?" And he said, "Tuan, saya betul-betul pusing. Sudah 48 jam tidak tidur dengan baik, sebab saya harus berkeliling-keliling di Tangerang dan Serpong, dan ya ada Polsek, dan juga ada 24 vihara yang sedang diancam oleh FBI dan lain-lain sebab situasi di Rohingya, di Arakan, ya, di Rakhine. Yeah. So it has a dampak. Don't believe that what happens politically is not exportable, because it is exportable. Yeah. But anyway, soft power played a very important role in the orbiting of Aung San Suu Kyi. Next slide. Soft power also, although Lady Doe refused the Nobel Prize, it was given in 1973 following the Paris Peace Accords to Lady Doe and to Henry Kissinger, a very Adipati Sinkuni type figure in world politics. But basically, one of the reasons why Vietnam won the war was because of its soft power. It's able to export a story about it. It was David and Goliath. It was able to slay the dragon at Dien Bien Phu. It was able to bring the Americans to the conference table in Paris in December 1973. Nixon and Kissinger were toying, as Putin and Soylu are toying, with using the nuclear bomb in Vietnam. And that's clear from all the blunders and everything that came from the Watergate. But one of the things that assisted them was that there was a great soft power movement, the anti-war movement in the United States, which, if they had used the bomb on Vietnam, would have created a revolution at home. So it stayed its hand. Yeah? And here you have in 1962, Ho Chi Minh coming to Bandung, yeah, with Bung Karno on a state visit. Yeah? Sudah menggoreskan cakrawala. So Vietnam had already, it was a known quantity. People were prepared to support because it was able to export a particular story about it. Next slide. And most recently, you've got Maria Ressa, who is an extremely courageous figure, on a par with Ahmad Mokhtar. The number of journalists who have been killed in the Philippines is one of the highest in the world. And she spoke truth to power, to Duterte, who killed his first man in Davao City, age 14, and basically went on killing for the rest of his life. So it's guns, booms, and politics in the Philippines. And here is someone who stood against that. But don't believe that Maria Ressa, if she'd been living in Mandalay or she'd been living in Xiamen, would have easily been orbited. Yeah? She was orbited because of basically she ran Rappler, which is a news organization, which its default setting is English. Yeah? And it had lots and lots of contacts within the United States and elsewhere. So the Nobel Prize is not sort of Philanthropist, it just doesn't suddenly come out of the woodwork. There has to be a preparation for it. So, bully for Maria Ressa, I think she's an extraordinary person and extraordinarily deserving honorand of the Nobel Prize. But there is a soft power envelope around that. Next slide. And there's a soft power envelope around Bishop Bello and Jose Ramos Horta. They both got the Nobel Prize in 1996, October 1996. One for the speaking truth to power from the Catholic Church, which was one of the institutions which was the most impervious to Indonesian establishments. And the other, because a bit like he'd gone to the international community and kept the issue of East Timor alive at the UN in its darkest days. And he came as a visiting fellow to Oxford, yeah? And he was obviously a thorn in the flesh, a pebble in the shoe for Alialatas, yeah? But once Portugal and Bello was able to convince Suarez, as the Portuguese president, that if Fretilin won, it would not be a communist regime. Portugal then put its full diplomatic and political power behind campaigning for East Timor. And the fact it was a Lusophone state, and you've got Brazil, it's one of the 12 biggest language speakers in the world, and because in January 1986 it became a member of the EU, tiny East Timor, which at that time was under 1 million people, was hugely able to amplify its message abroad. Yeah? So just because you're very small doesn't mean you have to be hidden. Yeah? You could be very big and also not taken notice of. Next slide. And Indonesians are no slouches. You know, you've got brilliant mathematical minds. You've got brilliant people, particularly from NTT. Yeah, because they look at the Lintang Sakti every night. They can dive deep. They've developed physiological conditions to be able to oxygenate their bodies below. We're looking for pearls. Yeah, so you've got dari Sabang sampai Merauke, you've got cornucopia of talent, absolutely bursting with talent. And in one of the places in NTT, Guru, without making a single mistake on any of the folios which he had, which had to be smuggled in, Pramudia wrote a sort of Balzacian comedy humaine on the, or like Tolstoy, War and Peace, on the Zaman Pergerakan, featured around Tirto Adi Suryo, who was a pioneering, I hope he's a Parliament, he should be a Parliament, the pioneering journalist, yeah, who was murdered by the Dutch in 1980, at a very young age. He passed out first in the ABS exams in the 1890s. Yeah. So Pramudia Ananda Tour, who produced his Guru Quartet, which my friend Max Lane, who was then the third secretary political at the Australian Embassy, with Yusuf Ishak and Pramudia himself, was able to translate and publish, became well known in the world. But you torpedoed him. You didn't want him to become a Nobel laureate because of his Lecca connections. Yeah? So in the 1990s, when you could have easily, it was a shoo-in, you could have had a Nobel Prize in literature, like Wole Soyinka in Nigeria, or Nadine Gordimer in South Africa. You went out on a limb to prevent that. Later, 2005, you have a miracle in Aceh. Yeah, the tsunami comes as an act of God, which washes the commander of GAM out of his jail, Abdullah. Yeah, and you have a negotiation which is chaired by Martti Ahtisaari, the former Finnish prime minister. Yeah, but a lot of legwork was done. One of the point people was Yusuf Kala. He worked with Doni Monarti, who was a special forces officer who learned Achinese and Mendekati. Olympian Gum. Yeah. So this was blessed of the peacemakers. He should have won. You should have put him up. I can't guarantee that he would have won, but he should have been a Calon. Yeah. And then if he'd won, everybody would know Indonesia. They wouldn't just know Bali. They would know the fact that there was Aceh. Yeah. And this Sulawesi Makassarese businessman had been the go-between in this negotiation. So there should have been like Leduk Tho and Henry Kissinger, Marty Ahtisaari, and Yusuf Kala in this, or Abdullah in this scenario. Yeah. So you're missing tricks. Yeah. It might be your Nyama. Yeah. You're a Katak di Bawah Roman. You feel that's Nyama. Yeah. It may be Nyama, but the coconut shell is not the sky. Yeah. You can mengoreskan chocolate. You're not second to China. You're not second to India. You've got a artistic creation. You've got an intellectual turn of mind. You've got a huge, rich pattern of mystical traditions in this country. You've got all the great religions here. In Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, you've got something extraordinary, and you need to start exporting that and making people understand who you are. In the old order of Bung Karno, he sent ships loaded with dalang, the equivalent of Nungki Kasuma Stuti, dancers and budaya and literature and painters to Europe, mainly to Eastern Europe. But there was a cultural policy. And today you need a cultural policy. Remember how Korea pulled itself up by its bootstraps by, in 1965, setting up the KDC, the Korean Development Corporation, which brought government, which brought the great Zaibatsu, the great corporations, and brought the creatives together. And then 50 years down the line, you win a Nobel Prize for the best film, Parasite, yeah, in 2019. It doesn't just happen, you have to plan. Put up their hand who knows the Mentri Babanas. In the new order, everybody knew the Mentri Babanas. You have to have planning, you have to think, what do we want to be 100 years to independence? You need to set goals, you need to think blue skies, far ahead, not just 5 years of an administration. You need to think like Singapore did. You know, Singapore on the 9th of August 1965 was a wave. You know, it could have sunk without trace, but it didn't sink without trace because basically it said, we are going to make our way in the world. We're going to be a little pocket Israel in the middle of a Malay Sea. Yeah. Next slide. So post-independence challenges, of which there have been many. Yeah, you haven't been dealt an easy hand. Indonesia dalam kawalan sejarah, the unfinished nation in Max Lane's view. Yeah, the fact that you at every turn people have been blocking you. Yeah, MI6, CIA, the people who facilitated. They did not create, but they facilitated what happened in 1965. An intelligence agent gets on the bus at Halim to brief the Pasupati, which are going out to kidnap the Germans. And that man says, take your prisoners. Basically, this was seperti Bung Karno bilang, itu seperti PKI Keblinger, just fell into a trap. And that trap was set and sprung by foreign agencies. I went to school with the son of the head of the BBC in Singapore at that time, Richard Norwood. I was elected as a prize fellow at Woodland with David Norwood. And his father told me that basically the BBC had the duty of menyalak all the telephone conversations of Sultan from Bogor and elsewhere with his minister, and then Dibocor. Yeah. So this was basically a setting. Yeah. Next slide. And if you look at the worrisome of that, it's still dealing with it. terms of the whole echelon of intellectuals, left-wing intellectuals. So education is at the heart of this. In the Dutch time, they were not good colonialists. They were not as bad as the Russians. They was not as bad as the Belgians, but they were pretty low down the Richter scale. But when you were lucky enough to get a Dutch education, it was a very high quality education. You read, if you were on the Banco SMA, HBS, over 100 books a year. Yeah, wajib. Since independence, when I was a student in Jogja in the early 1970s, Malaysians were coming to Jogja to study medicine at Bugea. They don't do that now. Yeah? You have a situation which has developed, particularly from the New Order period, in which the Socratic dialogue, if you're going to nurture research culture, you have to question everything. Everything has to be questioned. I remember when I was appointed a prize fellow at Magdalen, I sat next to A.J.P. Taylor, the TV Don, the famous historian, and he asked me, who was your supervisor? And I said it was Richard Cobb, and he said, Awas, Chelaka. That man has no doubt, you know? He's so certain about everything. A good historian has to doubt everything. You have to question everything. When I get my son from school and I leave you, the first question I ask is, what interesting questions did you ask your teachers? Not what they fed you. Yeah? Just because you're a professor, a lot of things I'm telling you is probably wrong. Yeah? You need to interpolate me. Don't accept other so much Pesantren culture or a culture of feudalism, of Mongo. Yeah? That has to be transcended. I mean, my own country is Sarat, class. Yeah? You have to have people like Gustur telling you straight, or Chikaman Kusuma at the Java Institute conference in 1918. Yeah, I love Borobudur, I love Prambanan, but this is not where it's at. We've got to help the Wong Chile. Yeah, we've got to actually put into effect Adilan Social. Yeah, before we start dreaming about the Hindu-Buddhist past. So you know the situation is pretty dire. And yesterday, the day before, I had an insight into how you can change it around. Because I was invited by Norman Regis, who is the son of Noel Regis, who is my informal supervisor. Richard Cobb didn't know anything about Java. The only thing he asked me was why some Chris blades are wavy and some are straight. Does that mean that the Georgianese go straight to the point and the Sudanese different? But basically, he was my informal supervisor, and I paid him in wine, couldn't pay him in money. And all his books, a third of his library was bequeathed to the new university, the Universitas Islam International Indonesia, which looks like a ziggurat. It looks like a flying saucer, which has landed in Chisawa. Yeah? You go there, and it's completely de novo. It's risen off the ground. And I had the good fortune to be able to tour the library with the deputy rector, Jamhari, yeah, Makruf. And he told me some very interesting things. I said, Master, why didn't you upgrade the alma mater of my very good friend, Azumadi Amascha? You know, you've got you in Chiputas. Why didn't you upgrade? Why do you have to start de novo? Yeah. Why don't you do as we did in Oxford with the Islamic Center, accept money from the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Kuwaitis? Why, when I look around your building, is there no element of Islam in this building? There are no special features. And he said, it's interesting you asked these three questions. He said, because we thought about that a couple of people, and we thought it's going to take too long. There are too many vested interests, yeah, to be able to turn. It's like turning a tanker in mid-ocean. Yeah, it's going to take too long, and there are too many people with vested interest in you in Sultan Shaykh Abdullah in Chiputat to be able to make that possible. We have to start from scratch. The reason we didn't accept Emirati money, or Saudi money, or Kuwaiti money is it all comes with strings attached. We are in the business of developing Islam Nusantara. not a form of Salafi Islam which they're going to export from the Middle East. So from beginning to end, it's no from foreign funding. And look around this building. Who is our architect? Well, it's like Pierre Kuipers in Amsterdam with the Rijksmuseum. He's a Catholic. He's a Javanese Catholic, Sarkono. And he used McLean Pont's vision of essentially a tropical villa type or church type sort of environment. But you're not going to see any features which are obviously Islamic, and that's intentional. Because basically from the smallest Satpan through to the staff, everybody, it's not a Muslim institution. Everybody has to be chosen from the various religious and ethnic groups. Yeah. This for me is going to be expensive, but you're a rich country. If you didn't have the Dutch here, you can get the $11 trillion back from the Dutch. You can use those $11 trillion to build a state-of-the-art education system and start de novo. Yeah. And then you can start having meaningful exchanges with the international community. You can develop in Chisala a form of nurtured research culture, the very best. If you're a researcher, you never turn off. You're thinking at night, well, how can I check this? And did Diponegoro, was he buried here or was he buried here? It's something that, continues. You have to have a passion. It's not a bureaucratic task. To be a researcher, like Ahmad Mokhtar, he didn't have many waking moments which were not thinking about leptospirosis or this research. Excellent. So there's something called alexithymia. Yeah. If you don't export your research, if you're not paid, if you're not able to punch your way to the world, you're going to have a situation which occurred at Santa Cruz. The Santa Cruz massacre, 12th of November, 1991. Yeah? When 250 mourners at the Santa Cruz Cemetery were gunned down by the TNM. Another 250 were murdered in the Wirabusada No. 7 hospital in Lahane afterwards. There was a second massacre. When this broke, it was dubbed by Western journalists. And one of my friends, Steve Cox, was there, another friend, Max Dahl, was there. They buried their spools of tape under the graves. And when the blood was still being washed off in the evening, they came back and took those off and taped them to the thigh of a Dutch woman who was going out and was able to get diplomatic status. So it reached the outside world, yeah? Despite all the efforts, not only of the Indonesians, but also of the Australians, to prevent that. When Steve Cox arrived in Darwin, he was strip searched, but very luckily, he'd gone down the aisle of the plane and seated. Yeah? But what happened was none of your consulates, none of your embassies, none of your diplomats, and they were instructed, picked up the phone in New York, Washington, London, Paris to answer, because the message from DEPU was that let the State Department answer on our behalf. This is memalukan, situasi yang nasi sudah menjadi bubur. We can't deal with this. Imagine, would the Federation of Malaysia, on the 13th of May, 1969, when the race riots occurred in Kuala Lumpur, have said, we can't handle this press conference. We're going to ask the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to deal with this on our behalf. Or in October 1968, when Singapore hung the two Marines and it picked up, the Republic of Singapore said, we can't handle the flak from this. We're going to ask the former colonial power to bat on our behalf. It's not, tidak masuk akal. Yeah? So developing soft power is not an option. It's an essential. Yeah, you've got to be able to talk truth to power. You've got to be able to say, okay, we put up our hands, yeah, and say this is how it is, and argue. Because if you don't, you're not going to be taken seriously. Next. So Indonesia's response to global challenges, I mean, you're trying to build up a profile of exports in which nickel pellets are actually generated here. You have to stand up to the WTO, which says you're putting a passport. A lot of importers of nickel in the developed world don't want Indonesia to be able to have hilirisation of their industry pertambangan. So here is an example of where you need soft power to be able to be exercised, to lobby, to ring up Bob Zulik and the people you know, and to say, we've got a case and we're going to take this right to the wire. Next slide. So this is the view of, I would say, not one of Indonesia's 3,000 plus institutions has an internationally respected standard. Well, it does now, because you've got Universitas Islam International Indonesia. But at that time, 2014, I looked this up. Every single one of Malaysia's top government universities, 6, are in the top 50 in Asia. The highest ranking Indonesian university is my university, Universitas Indonesia, which ranks at 56. At 52, there is a hospitality university. It's called Taylor's in Kuala Lumpur. 20 years ago, it was operating out of Maluku. It's now ranked higher in the QS Pakurele Simmons ranking than the top university in Indonesia. You could say the QS rankings are nonsense, but something must be going. This is a wake-up call. It's not tidak patut, tidak keren, tidak membawa untung. If you don't, and to do this, you have to be bloody bold and resolute. You have to ride a coach and horses through the PKS domination of the Prodi Sejarah in UI or the Rakyat in UGM and people who have vested interests, and you need to start from scratch, build it from scratch. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult. Next slide. This is wrong, because today, Ibu Lilis told me that you actually have 10,000 books online. Fully for you. This is basically, finances are not a problem. If you look at the Perpustakaan Nasional, they have a unique resource in the Koran Daerah, which were published by the Dutch presses in the period between the beginning of the Pergerakan and 1958, when the Dutch were expelled over the New Guinea issue. All those newspapers, sangat rentan dengan awatropis, they need to be micro, they need to be digitized, they need to be available. If you look at the lockdown, what the lockdown has told us is that the Maros, something Merauke, something Rantapau, you've got people out in the boondocks who are really interested in doing research. And if you have your facilities online, you can do that research. I mean, I did from the beginning to the end. Beginning is the first time I opened them, to the end when it was published in Paris, an article, and it took 6 months. An article, because I just thought, well, what can I find on Belfer about the ship that took Diponegoro into exile in Manado, the Pollux, the Pollux? And there was so much, because all the shipping news was in the intelligence reports of the that I was able to write on it, and it was published. So basically, if you want 100 flowers for bloom and 100 schools of thought content, you've got to do some of the groundwork. And the groundwork, this is teaching my grandmother to suck eggs. But you're much better at digital issues. You're much better at issues to do with electronic online communications than a fuddy-duddy like myself, and you can easily do it. Next slide. So the Indonesian library, some of it is online, but not all of it is online. And some of the most important parts, if all those newspapers go, You're not going to be able to write a history of the middle class in Calcutta in the 1930s with Jerry Van Ginken. Yeah. These are a precious resource and they're a unique resource. You also need to do this with UNRI. All your archives, colonial archives, need to be online. I spent 2 weeks in UNRI, spent 4 million rupiah going to Proto Ampera to find one document. And that document was when Purworejo was first mentioned in a Dutch document for the first time in 1831, February 1831. In order to write this book, Sisi Line. Yeah. I discovered it, but it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Next slide. So I've talked about this. Yeah, you've got 280 million people. You speak one of the 12 largest languages in the world. If you include New Caledonia and the southern Philippines, and Brunei and Malaysia and Suriname. Lots and lots of people around the world, but it's not a global language. You can't walk down the Hongi in Tokyo and speak Indonesian and expect people to immediately respond. Mongomas, Miki Mawam. Yeah, they're not going to say that. Yeah. But if you speak English and Mandarin now, and if you speak Spanish in the American hemisphere, you can probably get by. Yeah. Next slide. And yeah, I mean, if there's no research culture, there's cases. Yeah. Universities, libraries are about, academia is about research, is about discovering things. I mean, I just come from a meeting in the Museum Sejarah Jakarta. We've got a Diponegoro room, and our boy, who's the architect, says, why should Diponegoro be featured? What about Cut Yadin? Yeah, who's kept downstairs? And ada kesetaraan gender, ada kesetaraan antara Jawa dan non-Jawa. Great, but someone's got to go and do the research on Cut Yadin and look at all the process verbal of what happened to Cut Yadin from her arrest until her exile in Sumedang and what happened after when she died in Sumedang in 1908. And then we could have a kamar upstairs, we could have a kamar Surapati. In the middle, we could have a kamar Diponegoro, and downstairs we could have a kamar Cut Yadin. But it's not a simsalabim. You've got to have someone who really knows their oaths, knows how to get to the fine grain. Next slide. The salaries. I mean, I don't know what University of Islam is paying, but they're certainly not paying the normal box standard, PNS salaries. Yeah, you need to retain people. I did odd jobs. I mean, the Times newspapers rang me up and said, could you do something on the Times 200 years before in 1789 when it covered the outbreak of the revolution? I got paid for that. That was not, I didn't have to chari project, in order to be able to live in Serpong and take my son to school and run a car and pay the ongkos of perjalanan ke Brin. So you need to pay people a living wage. If you look at Ignatius Jonan, what he did for the Kereta Api commuter line, he worked a miracle between 2009 and 2014 when he was the head of Kereta Api. Until he became transport minister. He transformed that. I mean, I used to take the train, and if I'd been an anthropologist wanting to, do a report on, the sort of slings and arrows of outrageous fortune of getting around Jakarta, yeah, fine, I could have written a report on traveling on the commuter line. No, it's easy peasy. It's not first world, but it's very, very good second world. And he didn't fling $8 billion around. He just bought the second-hand rolling stock of the Japan Coastal Railway and imported it. And the salaries, if you are basically the station or the Wilayah Kereta Api commuter line head of Parung Panjang, Serpong, and points out to Rangkas, you're going to be paid now 20 million a month, basic salary. Yeah? If you've got a wife who's got a warung, you can get by on that. Yeah? It's no longer 500. I mean, my friend, former student, Sunjayati, he's got perfect Dutch, yeah? But the basic starting salary for a dosen You correct me, but it's very, very low. You know, you can't live on that. You need to think to reward people. Next slide. And the civil service status. I can understand why the civil service status, because it's cradle to grave. You're looked after. You've got BPJS, and you've got pension, and you've got tidak ada ancaman that you're going to perish or die in, like my shop, wallpaper shop, which I was trying to get 10 million a month profit out of. Yeah, it's enough, comfortable, yaman. Yeah. But you're not going to get my grandfather, Edward Carey, who was a barrister at law in Dublin and became for 34 years the registrar of the University of Liverpool. I'm sure he was a very good administrator. You need administrators, but administrators are not academics. Yeah. Clean two different things. Like Charles I, when he was executed on the banqueting hall, he said, between a king and a subject, these are two clean different existences in the world. King is a will to meet. So to be a civil servant, I can understand. Why do civil servants all wear uniforms? Well, that's Dynal's place, because he dressed everybody in military dress, and Bupati was a colonel, and Chamat was a major, and local Lura was a lieutenant. Yeah, and you have the Warisan of Dynal's, but you've got to separate these two. If you're a civil servant, you don't have something called a sabbatical. There's no word in the Indonesian language for sabbatical. Yet the norm in Western universities is that every 6 years you work in finance, you get a year free. Not free of salary, you get paid. You get paid to do some serious research. Building a book on Correggio, doing an edit of Ratna Masardono, writing the book on, which I didn't do, but Kevin, my colleague from Oxford did, on Ahmad Mokhtar. Yeah, Sampad Marsuki, Kevin Baird. Yeah. You need to push forward the fact that 90% of everything that's published overseas by Indonesia in scholarly journals in monographs is written by non-Indonesians or those who've taken foreign citizenship. Not good news. You don't control the story. You're not able to, if you're Ali Alatas, or if you're, Bung Sharia, or if you're dealing with a crisis, you need to be able to shape the storyline. You need to be able to shape the agenda. I remember I met with Hassan Waryudo, who's one of your foreign ministers, and he said, I did my thesis University of West Virginia, or he did it in his law thesis, international law thesis. He did it on the Hogan Reviews, the roundtable talks. I'm sure he did a very good thesis, but his supervisor was someone who would be the legal counsel for the Dutch team at the roundtable conference in The Hague. And he hated Indonesia's guts. And that came up in supervision. So you can't rely. I mean, you could think, well, here is Peter Carey, a great friend of Indonesia, but some dark skeleton could be in my background and I could have been abducted, I don't know, in Georgia and taken to pine trees and used in various rituals, or I don't know. And I kept it secret. Don't rely on foreigners to speak on your behalf. Don't rely on the State Department to speak on your behalf when you have a diplomatic incident. You need to control the story. Next slide. Sabbaticals, what we talked about. It's essential. You need to, and if you're a PLS, you don't get a sabbatical. If I'm a year away, I don't get promotion. Next slide. And peer group review. Here is not the last word on it. We're around 2,220 footnotes. Each one of those footnotes could be questioned. Does Peter Carey get the Javanese right? Well, probably not, because Peter Carey was not born a Javanese. It wasn't his mother tongue. So let's go to town and correct, have a feedback. Yeah, that's the scholarly way in which you nurture research culture. Just because Peter Carey comes from Oxford, well, he's fair game. Yeah, don't put people on the pedestal. Peter Carey, the name, is completely bog standard. Peter in Latin means stone, and Ochara in Gaelic means black. So black. And you can actually take that person to task and you can actually critique. Next slide. Next slide.
It's on the
Hang on.
way.
It's on the way. It's taking. Well, the next slide, if I can remember right, I think is about, it's to do with research culture, it's to do with basically how you go about it.
Engaging.
Yeah, engaging with the scholarly community. Wider community. Fine, we've got great researchers, Gatmunda Jito, who was totally sold on the idea of Trowulan had canals. And you have Ariswananda, who's his pupil, who said, Tidak ada kanal di Majapahit. Yeah. Interesting discussion. Bayangkan, if Trowulan had had canals, it would have been one of the wonders of the world. Amsterdam has canals, Bangkok has canals. Yeah, there are canals in coastal and littoral areas, but to have somewhere where you get off, drop the Brantas for 30 kilometers, get off at Montjuic and take a bullock cart, and you suddenly find a town with canals. Masuk akal bahwa orang-orang dan siapa yang datang akan menulis because it's one of the wonders of the world. You need to take that idea, you need to ask Roland Fletcher to hold a seminar for you at ANU and to test it. Research is not research unless it's tested. It's like a researcher is like a goldsmith. You have to taste, you have to weigh, you have to assay, you have to think. Does this work? And if it doesn't work, start again. Edison, 83,000 times to create a light. Next slide. I think probably we've come to the end. I'm going to close it there because I think I've shared enough. The last 3 slides, which are taking a long time, it's a bit like the Senja Utama to Georgia to be able to go through. The last slides were about, well, the wonderful world of, actually recreating, bringing the, looking to the future and bringing something from the depths up to the surface, like the YIVO Institute, the Jewish Institute in New York, for all the shards of information which was able to glean from the bloodlands of Eastern Europe in which 6 million Jews had perished. He was able to recreate Jewish culture, Hebrew culture, through a digitization of the shards which he was able to collect. Yeah. So you can actually create Majapahit, you can create Sri Vijay, you could do anything, but it has to be succinct. You can't be on a badin bari, avec la recherche. You don't play around, because otherwise planes will not sky. People start dying on operating. I leave you with one thought. This is from a Nobel laureate in economics. It's from Merton Sorum, who got the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1987. And he said, dalam jangka waktu panjang, tempat-tempat yang mempunyai ciri khasan yang istimewa dan jelas akan lebih cepat berkembang secara ekonomis daripada tempat-tempat yang tidak memiliki ciri khasan. Jadi setiap tempat wajib mengenali keistimewaan khas mereka masing-masing dan mengembangkan keistimewaan yang khas itu. Atau mengambil risiko bahwa mereka akan menjadi tempat yang dapat saja dan tidak ada sesuatu yang spesial untuk apapun. Tempat yang enak didiami sebab mempunyai ciri khasan bukan suatu kemewahan atau lux untuk kelas menengah atas, tapi suatu keharusan dasar. Yeah. So you have to basically develop what is unique about this fauna and flora. You need the uniqueness of fauna and flora. There's also a fauna and flora of cultures. You've got a unique culture. You're not China. You're not India. You're not Holland. You're not Europe or America. You happen to be the Nusantara, and that has its, oh, you need to discover what is special about it, develop it, and make it your own. We're already doing that with Aniavanti in terms of design. You need to do that with your academics. You need to do that with your citizens. You have to have a warm and woo. They need to understand who they are. Dari mana, mau ke mana, siapa diri? Where do I come from? Where am I going? Who am I? You have to answer these existential questions. And remember Rumi, yeah? Go with all. Take the name of all. To everyone say yes, yes, but dwell in your own village. Kepada siapa bilang iya? Ambil bahasa siapa? Ambil nama siapa? Dengan siapapun pergi bertamasya. Tapi masih tetap tinggal di kampung. You need to be grounded public intellectuals. You need to know exactly who you are, like Edward Said or Ibn Ford, but yet Malamman Buan. Let 1,000, 100 flowers bloom, 100 schools of thought condemned, and wake up.
Baik, terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much, Pak Peter, for really extensive and quite interesting talk. So I think I just want to go straight to Q&A sessions. Probably firstly, go to Q&A sessions. Probably the three first questions here offline, and I shall just solve some questions online. So, ladies and gentlemen, any questions? Yeah, so please mention the name.
Okay, very much, Peter Kelly. It's really insightful information I got from this your presentations. And you really give us the problems we have on the scientific, and then one thing that just first is about the status of researcher in our countries. Most of us is the government employee, and this is one thing that you mentioned about the critical issues in within the scientific culture, because we are here as government researchers, has to comply with the government's regulation, which is sometimes really what we call it against or different, yeah, really not compatible with the scientific culture. And I've experienced just looking at some research institutions in other countries, and I found that there is no government research institution, but they have government funded institutions. So it means they're still working as the professionals in the scientific, as a scientific researchers, but they get funding from the government. So this is the problem we have. And you also mentioned that we need to build from scratch, or can we build from the existing institution? This is, I already have a question. Maybe we need to build a new institution, which is really compatible with the scientific organization. That's my question. Thank you.
Another two questions. Yeah, one.
Thank you, Pak Irawan. Maybe I ask in bahasa Pak Peter. Tadi disebutkan bahwa ada 5 kategori Nobel. Itu kalau kita salah ingat, terus sastra, kemudian 5. Sehingga saya tadi 5 tadi. Kalau kita lihat, kita kan punya pemimpin-pemimpin yang mampu menyatukan dunia, tapi kenapa itu tidak mendapatkan Nobel? Karena penelitian yang menunjang ke sana untuk mengangkat tokoh yang akan kita ajukan sebagai pemenang Nobel itu tidak ada atau bagaimana? Misalnya Pak Karno itu kan pada tahun 55 pernah menyatukan Asia Afrika, mendatangkan negara dari Asia dan Afrika untuk ke Indonesia. Itu kan menurut saya patut mendapat Nobel di bidang politik pemerintahan. Kemudian Pak B.J. Habibie itu kan juga warga kehormatan di Jerman dengan sainsnya yang berkaitan dengan teknologi pesawat. Nah ini kan sebetulnya orang-orang yang pantas untuk mendapatkan Nobel, tapi ini belum dapat diperoleh dari Indonesia. Bagaimana mungkin kiat-kiatnya supaya beliau-beliau ini dapat diajukan supaya mendapatkan Nobel tadi, mendapatkan penghargaan Nobel. Terima kasih.
Yep. Probably for the sessions, one last question. You can ask in any language. I mean, in bahasa Indonesia, in bahasa Jawa. If you dare, you can ask Pak Peter in Dutch, Portuguese, or in Chinese, because I know only Chinese because he's quite good at languages. Please.
Thank you, Mas Irawan. Terima kasih, Pak Peter. I think there's a lot of word encouragement, and Pak Peter already said that we have a lot of time, that we have such a richness in Indonesia that we need to come forward by ourselves and tell the world, the global academy, or the global leadership about that richness and strength. And do you think that maybe my question is currently BRIN focusing more on global publications? Do you think it is a good strategy for us? While I think at the grassroots, we, as probably a lot of young researchers at BRIN, are also struggling with English as their the main language of global publication. And it seems like we are pushed dipaksa, dan bahkan mungkin a lot of publication is like tidak matang ya, because of that regulation that we need to Paris in English. Kita memaksa diri sendiri untuk tulis dalam bahasa Inggris, meskipun mungkin tidak secara quality it's not that good. I think that's our problem now. Do you think that's a good strategy to push ourselves? And second, I would like to get your tips about, I think it's really a good term that is said about eureka moments. Eureka, the moments that we find very important moments as researchers. Yeah, and like we find something that is we feel passionate about, and maybe you can share your experience about your eureka moments and what makes that passion about, particularly about history, as a scientist that keeps you going as a scientist and academic. Thank you, Pak Peter.
Terima kasih, Bu Lilis. So there's 3 questions, probably we can directly answer.
Terima kasih. Bu Lilis. Ya, mungkin saya mulai dengan Bu Lilis. Sebab ini menarik sekali. Memang itu satu siksaan kalau kita harus memakai satu bahasa atau satu cara untuk ekspresi diri sendiri, bukan bahasa kami. Dan kalau kita menuju ke Bangkok, mereka sekarang ya lebih dari 90% Mandarin. Jadi ya yang saya idamkan adalah bahwa ada di sini di Indonesia ada institusi seperti Universitas Islam Nasional Indonesia yang betul-betul bisa berdempet dan bisa ada kooperasi yang betul-betul berhasil dengan institut luar negeri. Dan mungkin kita bisa mempertimbangkan apa yang dibuat di Malaysia, di mana ada banyak kampus dari Yale atau dari Oxford sendiri atau dari Nottingham yang berdiri di dalam negeri. Ya. Jadi itu tidak semutu kita pergi ke Oxford atau ke Nottingham, tapi sesuatu yang bisa menjadi portal bagi kita dan bisa menjadi salah satu discussion partner dan juga bisa ada penilaian dan mutu-mutu dari research yang lambat laun bisa berkembang di dalam arah yang betul-betul positif. Ya. Jangan harus keluar dari zona nyaman, harus lapang dada untuk membuka diri untuk kritik yang pedas. Seperti negara Manda Juto dan Aisunanda ada sesuatu yang radikal berbeda, radikal pandangan yang radikal berbeda. Tapi itu hakikatnya dari satu cara thesis, antithesis, synthesis, bagaimana kita bisa way forward sebagai ilmuwan. Dan eureka moment sangat penting. Kita harus ada mentor yang betul-betul tingkat. Kasus saya dalam waktu saya di Oxford, saya bukan ranking 1, bukan ranking 2. Saya selesai 6 hari bertrik matahari di luar exam school, 11 papers, dan tidak jelas bahwa saya urung first class honors, tidak jelas bahwa saya top of the second class honors. Jadi saya harus ada baik ujian lisan, ya ujian lisan. Saya bel kepada saya punya supervisor Richard Park untuk menolong menggalang saya supaya saya bisa determinasi. Esok hari bisa menjawab dengan lantang pertanyaan dan dia cak saya oleh sebagai Richard Park itu dia dan kita duduk di pelataran dari college beliau dan tiba-tiba di atas sedang jalan kepada kami adalah ketua dari badan penguji, seorang yang drinking companion Richard Koch, Jack Gallagher. Dan Jack Gallagher bilang pada saya, saya tidak bisa membongkar rahasia. I'm not going to tell secrets out of school. But if you convince us tomorrow that you are menguasai lapangan, you will get a first. Yeah. If you get a first, you will get an automatic research grant from the SSRC, Social Science Research Council. And if you got an SSRC grant to do a scripture, a dissertation on history, what would you choose? And I said, well, that's easy for me. I've just spent a year in Grenoble. I've had Richard Koch as my supervisor. I'm going to take the Dauphine. I'm going to take Lyon Grenoble, Franche-Comté as my area, and I'm going to look at the regional impact of the French Revolution between 1787 and 1790. And he said, boom, don't do that. That's an oversubscribed field. Yeah. But I've just come back from The Hague and I've seen all the papers for Marshall Dynevors. Why don't you take Marshall Dynevors? Why don't you take Java as the dumper of the French Revolution? Yeah. And he got me thinking. I had in my pocket an ESU scholarship, English speaking Indian scholarship, to go to Cornell. They had a fantastic Indonesia program, they had a fantastic Southeast Asia program. And I started thinking, well, maybe he's right. I should do a thesis on Dynevors. And when I came to Cornell, they said, that's not what we do here. We're not colonial historians. You learn Javanese, you learn Indonesian, and you learn Dutch, a colonial language. And then you come back to us and say, and if it's still Dynevors, that's fine. Because we're going to do it from akar rumput, bukan dari Geladak Kapal atau dari Belanda. Salah satu kantor VOC. So you need to have people who are, mentors who change your mindset at a particular juncture. It's another eureka moment that Christian Eichmann had with his cook and the chickens. You suddenly see that there's something here. And then when I got to Cornell, I went into the library and took the Grass book on Geschiedenis van Indonesia, opened the book, and in the middle of the book, there was a chapter on the Java War. And the chapter on the Java War had a picture. It had a picture in it about, I don't know, but it was a picture of Diponegoro entering the Battling Camp. Here it is. Yeah, it was this picture. Not a very good reproduction. Basically, there was this sketch. You were a South officer. No, just that. No, just that. That can be.
Okay.
I thought, ada semacam kontrapati antara saya dan Diponegoro. Dia seorang sosok lesu di atas kuda sumba, diiringi dengan harga yang berkembang. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this period of transition, why don't I take Diponegoro as a transition figure rather than Dynevors? Yeah. So that was, for me, that was another eureka moment. And the third eureka happened in New Orleans when I went to take a Mississippi Palestine, and I saw a great sign saying Jakarta Lloyd. And I thought, well, I'm going to go to Indonesia on a Jakarta Lloyd ship. And I came back to Cornell and said, well, I know who is the agent for Jakarta Lloyd in New York. I can get you. So be prepared for the unexpected. So that's you're on average, and then if they're really good, tidak nyaman. Kalau nyaman, silakan. In French, you can have that situation. The second was the category Nobel. Dari Pak Obama, ya. Mengapa seorang Habibie, mengapa seorang Bung Karno tidak diajukan? Ya, Asia Africa, it was a great controversy, and it actually had a nasty impact on the UN. Prior to that time, the UN was largely a Western body. After that time, it became a genuinely international body. And in the best of all possible worlds, rather than honoring Barack Obama or honoring Kissinger, Bung Karno should have been honored, because this was a controversy. Yeah, there was Ali Sastro Joyo, and there were other people involved. There was Sultan Abdul Ghani. There were other people involved, but he had the Gagasan. And also to involve Africa, not just Asia. Asia made sense, but Africa. 30 countries, if you include the two Vietnams, gathered in 1955 in Bandung. Tidak ada, and Chou En-lai was there. Tidak ada sebatang kara politisi dari barat. Italia para se. Italy moves on its own. It's going to take its own course. And Indonesia para se. From that moment, and he should have been honoured. With Habibie, I don't know. I'm not able to judge, but for me, he took a very brave decision on his team. And I think he could have been honoured for that. With the referendum. Gus Dur should have been honoured for liberating the minorities. My wife is from Sundanese Hokkien family, and from Gus Dur onwards, they could use their own name. Wow, Marga, bisa merayakan Imlek, bisa pakai bahasa Mandarin dan Hokkien. He liberated the minorities. He's the sort of person that Aung San Suu Kyi should have been. There's no point honoring your majority population. Don't spoil them. You need to protect the minorities. The 5% of the population of Burma is Muslim. It's not just the Rohingya. They're in central Burma and Maitila. These are the people who need to be honored and protected. And if you're a leader, you have to be a stateswoman. You have to actually look and speak truth to power to your own people. Tell them a few home truths, like Gandhi, who said, if they're not going to accept me, I'm just going to furl my flag and go and live in the Himalayas. I don't agree with untouchability. I don't agree with the caste system. There must be Muslim-Hindu friendship. You have to go out on a limb. You have to speak truth to the reality of a population which is often terblenggung di dalam kepala. So but not just prestasi, itu harus diorbitkan. You've got to work on that. You've got to gain traction. Getting traction, you have to work the corridors of power. You've got to talk with people. You've got to pull people aside in the Sela dari G20 di Bali and say, we want X to become our Calon Nobel. Would you support that? And the first is research institutions, government funded, Ibu Trina, PNS, existing institutions. Sok kadang-kadang harus ada satu kebijakan pemerintah. The film which you can see this time is on Richard Oppenheimer. Robert Oppenheimer, the whiz-kid physicist who, with the Manhattan Project, discovered the nuclear bomb, designed it. That needs, and with Britain, radar, the development of radar, that needs serious government support. So if you're going to go nuclear here in Indonesia with nuclear power, you need maybe a government-funded team. You need a team. But most of research is not like that. You need to have a situation in which people can work in small groups together. They can dream together. And to be a PNS, to be an academic, to be a human being, to be an intellectual, a public intellectual, there are no sacred cows. You have to be able to ask any question. You have to be able to write anything, provided it's not libelous, and basically kick all the lids off the dustbins. And you can't do that if you're a PNS. And you can't do that if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Javanese Samoa.
Is there any comments from the audience? Or we just continue to first note? We will back to the offline audience. Now we turn to the online audience. Iqbal has one comment and two questions. About firstly, he says that why we should be jealous to the country that had a Nobel receiver, because in some cases it's kind of like reveals the main problem in that country, stuff like that. Because yeah, that's the comment from Iqbal. And then he asked about the situation in Indonesia. We usually he sees that we always inward looking because we are have a complexity inside, and then probably forget to see outside, outward looking. So always looking inside. And then the second question is about Pak Iqbal. Kalau masih online boleh coba ditanyakan lagi Pak.
Oke. Silakan dibacakan saja Mas. Yang ini pertanyaan terakhir. Saya kira itu yang terpenting. Atau saya coba bacakan ya di sini.
Di Pak di sini. Terputus ini tadi.
Is it accurate to say that establishing a research culture in the social science and humanity is more difficult or more challenging compared to establishing research culture in natural science? Because in social science and humanities, experimentation cannot be done. Hence, we have to be open-minded, and we have to engage in a lot of debates, because open-minded is needed to open us to various perspectives, while engaging in debate becomes even more crucial to filter out weak arguments. And those two necessities is absent in our culture. That's why establishing research culture in social science and humanities is, I think, more difficult than in natural science. What do you think about that, Pak Peter? Thank you very much.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Iqbal. So, is it more difficult to establish or conduct or develop a natural sciences experiments research than the social sciences? Because in social sciences, we must have kind of open-mindedness. Sometimes a big problem here in Indonesia, something like that. You want to answer the questions, or probably we will go to Pak Iwan first?
Yeah. The last question was about whether it's more difficult in the social sciences than in the natural sciences. I think the MIT team in Pare, Mojokerto, you had Donald Fagg, who's working on government institutions, you had Alice Dewey on markets, you had Hilda Geertz on the family, Clifford Geertz on the religion of Java. You can actually gather together a very interesting, and Robert Jay on the peasants. Sometimes you can have an MIT-style team of social scientists which actually get very interesting and extremely creative and very penelitian and mandasa written. So I don't think it's foreign to the social sciences. You do have teams. I'm teaming up with Brill and with Parish Noor to launch a series on colonialism, colonial book series. So, I think we should encourage these forms of cooperation. And if it's properly thought through, then something like the MIT team can be extremely helpful. And the first point was about being inward-looking. Well, I think that's nonsense. Because if you go back to the pre-colonial time, the first thing the Portuguese saw as they sailed through the Sunda Strait in the early 16th century were Irianese rafts. People from West Papua were actually navigating these seas on their own built boats. 1,500 years before the present day, from central Kalimantan, populations went across the southern Indian Ocean using the trade winds and came to Madagascar. Malgache is an Austronesian language. The beginning of sawa cultivation, the beginning of cultivation of bananas, the beginning of the settlement of that particular area of northern Madagascar came about because of Indonesian seafarers. Yeah. So this was a very dynamic society. Yeah, it was a frontier society, and women had a very important role in that society. It was Polynesian and matriarchal. Yeah, if you look at Diponegoro when he was brought up, tidak ada sebatang kara laki-laki di dalam lingkup beliau di Tegaraja. Ada Eyang Buyutnya, yang Ratu Ageng anak kiai dari Sragen, yang ujung tombak dari Tarakaca dari Jogja, ya. Ada eyangnya dari Pamekasan, Ratu Keraton, tapi tidak ada sebatang kara. Dan menjelang maghrib di keraton tidak ada sebatang kara lelaki di dalam lingkup dari keraton, sebab semua servis jurusan atau semua tugas melindungi raja ada di tangan perempuan, prajurit istri. Ya. Dan prajurit istri membuahkan 2 jenderal yang juga cukur rambut, Perang Jawa, Radenau Serang, Nyai Agung Serang, dan Radenau Kusumo, yang menjadi antara jenderal yang paling ditakuti oleh Belanda. Ya. Jadi menurut saya ini salah satu distorsi dari sejarah kita yang diakibatkan oleh mungkin Islam modern dan juga patriarki dari kolonialisme. Ya. Ada distorsi dari the colonial state, ada historiografi bahwa dengan perempuan ada urusan mungkin. Ya. Sebenarnya itu tidak benar. Di abad 17 ada ratu di Aceh, abad 16 baru itu di Kalinyamat yang bisa menghadang Porto di Malaka, dan di mana-mana ada perempuan yang betul-betul mencolok di dalam bidang militer, politik, dagang. Ratu Ageng walaupun seorang dengan masyarakat, dia ekspor 50 ton dari beras kepada Sumbawa. Dia anak keturunan dari Bima, ya, dan mendagang. Jadi tidak ada, it's not in silos, tidak ada bangunan santri. Bisa ada seorang bangsawan seperti Diponegoro yang juga berkiblat santri, ya. Bisa ada seorang bangsawan yang juga turun di dalam dagang, turun tangan dalam administrasi tanah. Jadi saya kira tugas dari sejarawan di Indonesia adalah untuk membuka layar dari satu cakrawala baru, dari cakrawala yang betul-betul mumpuni dan betul-betul bisa memberitahu kepada kami siapa diri kami, ya? Bukan warisan kolonial. Ya? Warisan kolonial harus dihapus dari otak kami.
Terima kasih Pak Peter atas jawabannya. Mungkin ada komentar dari tadi yang nanya di online. Is there any response to Pak Peter's answers? Pak Iqbal?
Terima kasih, sudah cukup. Terima kasih Pak Peter.
Ya, terima kasih.
Pak Iqbal benar ya, ada banyak politik.
Sebelum saya kembali lagi, before we continue Q&A sessions in this room, I want to probably ask first, is there Bu Melanie still on? Okay. Mungkin Pak Riwanto ada yang ingin disampaikan, Pak? Is there anything that you want to respond? Any comments or probably questions to Pak Peter? Oke, baik. Kalau gitu saya kembali ke, so I will return to this audience. Is there any questions? Mas Agus di belakang, Mas Felani, Mas Gilang ya. Coba Mas Agus dulu.
Terima kasih Mas Irawan.
pidato Pak Peter ini pernah disampaikan beberapa bulan yang lalu di forum PMB juga, dan itu memantik diskusi hangat di media massa, salah duanya ya, dari Mas Taufikur Rahman, filosof dari UGM, dan Pak Najib yang kemudian merespon artikel tersebut, dan itu membuat dalam tanda kutip gerah banyak akademisi, terutama periset di Badan Riset Inovasi Nasional. Salah satu, saya kembali ke artikel Pak Mas Taufik, di situ disebut tadi juga oleh Pak Peter disampaikan, salah satu aspek yang membuat akademisi Indonesia tidak banyak dikenal di dunia internasional adalah tidak adanya budaya atau tradisi peer review, dan menurut Mas Taufik tradisi peer review itu hampir mustahil ada di Indonesia karena budaya yang segan atau terhadap senior. Nah, di waktu yang hampir bersamaan setelah perdebatan itu, saya menyimak berita perkembangan ilmu pengetahuan di Vietnam. Di dalam beberapa media disebut Vietnam, Thailand, dan beberapa negara Asia Tenggara, kita mengecualikan Singapura yang sudah lebih maju ya, itu menganggap bahwa akan menyalip, bahkan sudah menyalip posisi Indonesia di dunia internasional. Nah, bagi saya harus diakui bahwa kita punya tradisi otoritarian yang sama dengan Vietnam. Nah, menurut Pak Peter, apakah yang bisa kita lakukan untuk memutus tradisi pakuh itu atau budaya segar untuk mengkritisi karya tulis senior atau pandangan senior yang masih berkembang di Indonesia? Saya pikir Vietnam dan Thailand punya tradisi yang hampir sama, dan itu sudah mulai berangsur hilang. Apa yang bisa kita lakukan untuk menghilangkan itu, Pak? Terima kasih. Kita tahan dulu, Mas Helen.
Thank you, Mas Irawan, and thank you, Pak Peter, for the insightful presentation and really open up our eyes about the research culture in Indonesia. When we talk about research culture in Indonesia, we also talk about the research policies in Indonesia, Pak Peter. And the research policies in Indonesia really smells with political party interest, I think. And it also happened when BRIN established in Indonesia. There are many critics from researchers that the establishment of BRIN smells with the political interest. So, do you think the politicians have the important role to nurturing the research culture in Indonesia? And as a researcher, what we can do to influence the politician to raising the awareness of the politician about the importance of the research, and how to build, I think, good relationship with politicians to nurturing the good research culture in Indonesia. Thank you, Pak Peter and Mas Irawan.
Thank you, Mas Helen. Mas Irawan.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Peter dan Mas Irfan. Saya Gilang dari Pusat Riset Hukum. Begini Pak Peter, tadi sudah disinggung sama Bu Lilis di awal bahwa BRIN ini adalah integrasi dari banyak institusi riset yang ada di Indonesia. Yang menjadi problem adalah tidak semua ternyata institusi riset itu punya kultur yang sama, kultur riset yang sama. Salah satunya adalah terkait bagaimana para peneliti yang junior atau early career researcher itu ketika bergabung di dalam institusi riset yang dulu itu ada yang institusi riset dia punya sistem pembimbingan atau mentoring yang baik dari senior kepada juniornya, tapi ada juga yang tidak punya. Jadi ada beberapa yang misalnya hanya institusi riset yang tidak punya kultur riset yang baik itu, para riset junior yang baru masuk ini hanya disuruh ngurusin administrasi aja, jadi skill risetnya nggak berkembang. Nah, tadi Pak Peter sempat menyinggung soal mentoring. Dari pengalaman panjang Pak Peter sebagai peneliti, sebenarnya bagaimana sih pola pembimbingan atau pembinaan atau mentoring dari para peneliti yang sudah senior dengan berbagai pengalamannya kepada para peneliti juniornya yang memang baru memasuki dunia riset. Ya, karena sekarang kita di BRIN mungkin kita punya kesempatan untuk menata kembali sistem mentoring sehingga nanti para peneliti muda ini juga bisa terarah dengan baik sebagai peneliti yang baik. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Mas Agus. Pertama ya, menyinggung teman muda ya Tataku Rahman yang menulis budaya toksik akademik di Kompas dan isu dari peer review dan dia fokus pada khususnya dan isu dari bagaimana kita bisa mengembangkan peer review kalau kita masih segan dari ya menghadang atau calling out atau dan buat salah satu questioning dari orang-orang yang lebih senior atau punya wewenang di atas kami. Ya. Saya kira ini akan mengalir lebih keras kalau ada dua hal yang dibuat di sini. Pertama, harus ada semacam a body of law which protects the right to free speech. So sekarang ada banyak orang yang dituduh libel, yang sebenarnya punya questions yang sebenarnya waras dan harus dipertanyakan. So unless you change the legal context in which it's very easy to sue people who you don't like or who are asking questions which like General Hoods don't, particularly care for, you're not going to get very much change because people are going to self-censor. Yeah. Or you're going to get a situation like you had with Munir, where someone will be done away with. Yeah. Because getting too close to the bone. Yeah. So there has to be legal protection enshrined in law for the right of the individual to free speech, provided that is within certain boundaries. You know? Obviously, you're not going to cross a line in terms of abuse or cross a line in terms of mencela sexualitas, mencela agamatas. It would be for you to decide that. You need to have a context in which you work. So if you don't have that context, that legal context, then you're not going to have any development. The second arus, I think, is if you have foreign campuses here, if you have Universitas Islam International Indonesia sebagai tuladan, and you have around that a whole circle of people who are talking with each other, exchanging views, getting together with each other for projects and questioning, then that will be an example. Yeah, that will set an example. That will be like Gallieni, General Gallieni in Madagascar, Pashtuni, to have a sort of, how can you spread a particular culture? He was thinking of a culture of colonial control, and he used the example of dropping a piece of, a drop of oil onto a fabric, and the oil would then disrupt the fabric. Yeah? And so you've got to have nodal points here within Indonesia of maybe it's in South Sulawesi where people are more Belak-Belakan, or maybe it's in West Sumatra, or maybe it's in Medan, I don't know. But you need to play to strength, use those communities which are empowered in terms of their intellectual willingness to merantau and to question and to speak Belak-Belakan. Yeah? East Java better than Central Java in this respect. Yeah? And you need to protect those people. Yeah? You need to make them treasures amongst women. Yeah? So that they are here to actually ask difficult questions. You need to ask difficult questions. There's a lot which is wrong, with my society, Britain, along with my adopted society, Ireland. You've got to ask those questions. You can't just sweep everything under the rug and then have a main 98. because everything just explodes in your face. You've got to deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis and not sweep them under the carpet. Vietnam and Thailand, I don't know. All I know is that Vietnam was on its back in December 1973 when the Paris Peace Accords were signed, and now it's number 8 in PISA, the program of international student assessment for mathematics and for the hard sciences. Yeah, Indonesia is number 62, along with the Dominican Republic and Sudan and Haiti. So something must be happening in Thailand. Maybe it's the worrisome of a Confucian culture, or it's maybe the worrisome of having to fight for their independence over 30, 40 years. But it's clear as night and day. I mean, I spent a long time in Vietnam and in Cambodia setting up programs for the disabled. And the moment you cross the border into Vietnam, people are reading books, people are playing chess, people are cycling purposefully. And in Cambodia, people are lying in hammocks. Yeah. So it's pretty clear, yeah, that there are different types of dolce far niente and different type, you know. I mean, we had as our host, you know, the sort of chamat of a particular mountain village, and he went around with a pith helmet, you know, sort of. We didn't have a single moment of quiet. You know, it can be draining, but that's how Vietnam basically survived and began to prosper. So if you're going to move, you've got to be prepared to be inconvenienced. You've got to be prepared to be put in a place which is not Myanmar. You've got to be prepared to put in a place which embarrasses you. You know? I was embarrassed this morning when I sat by Blue Lilies and I realized that one of my slides was just wrong. You know, you've got 10,000 books online, so you're already setting an example of what should be done. So as far as Vietnam and Thailand and the Ilmu Kanak Thailand and the culture of, well, Pergerakan, Zaman Pergerakan knew that because they didn't choose Japanese as your national language, they chose Malay. Only, I don't know, 22% of your population used Malay de rigueur within their family. Only about 13% are 5% are Malays. Yeah? But you use that language. And there was a reason for that. If you use Javanese, it would be sarat dengan hirashi. Pulau Nuan Pangapuntum, Pulau Chaos Manikoda, Pulau, yeah, you've got to use different words. Yeah, otherwise I'm going to embarrass you. I'm going to, I don't know my place. Whereas with Malay, with the demotic movement of Malay, which obviously was put in reverse in the New Order period, you've got a powerful vehicle for leveling, yeah, and a powerful vehicle for leveling down in terms of not privileging the Japanese. They're the largest, 110 billion Japanese, but you don't use their language. I wish we did the same in England, and it was not English, but Scots Gaelic, yeah, and then we'd have real leveling. So, you know, it's been thought about. You created a republic. You didn't create a monarchy. It's not a constitutional monarchy. You got rid of the Sultan of Pontianak, and you got only Georgia survived because he became a Republican sultan. And he paid for the republic, and he opened his kraton to the law faculty, and he behind the kraton in the secret passages of the Alun-Alun Selatan. Sudirman met, or Suharto met with the Sultan to plan the 1st of March Serangan Umum, 1 March. Yeah? So it's all hands to the pump. If you create a republic, that has the kewajiban on your citizens. Oh, the mentoring pattern. Yeah.
Diverse.
Sure. Yeah.
In relation to
Yeah, I think part of the mentoring pattern is to do what Jack Gallagher did to me, which was to do bowl fast googling, to bowl a fast ball, and to get you to think out of the box. The other is to learn how to mentor people, which enhances them, which empowers them, which doesn't belittle them. And when they go forward to publish something, you support that and you don't then bomb chain and use that for your own work when all the research has been done by them. Yeah. So this requires, I would get rid of all the professors. Yeah. Come from alias, start from one. Yeah. Start at the bottom and start building. Yeah. We're not creating a new Kraton. We're creating a Machiavellian republic.
Yeah. I think, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think that's the difference, in Indonesia, a lot of professor who doesn't actually write, put their names as the second, while the students as the first. But in different, like in my experience in Melbourne, my professor doesn't want, because that's your work, that's fully yours. I don't want to be in it. Just if you want to say thank you, just in the footnote system, it's fine. I think that kind of culture needs to be, built and create. Because a lot of universities make that requirements for professor to be put their names.
We need to have a social revolution, mini social.
Yeah.
Because basically what you have here is an ancien regime in which you have noblesse de role.
Yep.
You have people, universities are a place, Rin is probably a place where you get status. It's not about scholarship.
Yep.
That status issue has got to be put on one side. Yeah. This is a place where you push forward the juggernaut of scholarship and you don't acquire status like a noblesse de role in Muslim regime. And people have got to be Maluka, like Mundajito with Arismunanda. Yeah. Here is an upstart pupil who says, no, it's not the case. There are no penalties. But then, to be fair, you've got to take that to the court of international opinion and say, can we argue this? You know about DEMS, digital enhanced landscapes. Tell us, is this going to work or it's not going to?
Thank you very much. Any other comments or response from Ananya tadi? Okay. Once again, I would like to offer to the audience, is there any questions? Probably one or two last questions to Dr. Kelly. Probably, Pak Peter, sebelum ditutup dengan closing remark, I just want to ask, I read editorials from Frank Condon. He was editor for DKI journals of KTLK. He says that, yeah, he feels kind of like disheartened because he received a lot of manuscript from Indonesia, from Indonesian writers, but in the end, eventually, he was rejected because of two reasons. First is about the quality itself. Also, the second one, probably, he says, because that manuscripts, those manuscripts are not engaged or not unable to attract the global audience to read that. Probably in your personal remarks, can you give any tips for us to how to engage, how our writings, karya kita itu bisa engage to the global audience? We don't forget to significant, but we not forget to analyze ourselves.
Yeah, Frank Online is a very interesting example because I produced an article for BKI and they rejected it. They said, this is not interesting. You've got to tell a story. And it went through multiple reviews. And to start with, I felt really annoyed because I thought, well, I'm with these needs. But in fact, at the end, I was really grateful because they caused me to think about what I was trying to say. And they changed my title, they changed the way I approached it. And it was actually a very creative, useful exchange between the expert readers the PKI editorial staff and myself. So I don't think it needs to be an ancaman. It could be an opportunity. Yeah. In terms of, I mean, I heard exactly the same from Archipel, because I went to visit Ekeo last week. They have lots and lots of manuscripts, but some of the manuscripts may actually be very interesting, but the task of bringing that over the line in terms of literary English is too great. I think there are two separate issues here. One issue is to do with how, if you've got something really good and you're onto a winner in terms of the research you've done, how can you actually put that in a context which is accessible? And to do that, you have to translate it, into a. So I think horses for courses, you need to have certain really able researchers who are allowed to publish and allowed to write in their own. But then you provide them with the facilities. They work alongside the translator to actually create an environment in which this particular piece of work is going to not only be accessible academically, but also accessible linguistically. Yeah, so that's almost you need to have, like Bakufu did in Deshima. You need to have a Oranga Buka, the Dutch trained scholars who are the interpreters between the Dutch physicians and scientists and the Japanese, who actually are able to turn this into a format which they can understand, read, and absorb. The second is the people who are actually working way and not getting proper mentoring. You need to be prepared to tell someone that this is a load of nonsense. You've got to go back to square one. Please don't just pile on detail after detail. You've got to think about what you want to say here, how you want to argue this. And sometimes you have to go through multiple versions, multiple people reading it. But you have to have an input which gets a person to question. Are you just doing this untuk pamor atau ini untuk sesuatu? Have you got something really important to say? Because if you haven't got something important to say, well, shut up.
Okay. Can we give a round of applause to Pak Peter Area? Thank you very much once again for really extensive and also intensive talk. To the audience here in PDI and also online, I would like to say also thank you very much for your participations. I would like to return even to SD.
Thank you, Mr. Peter and Bapak Irawan. Kita berikan tepukan sekali lagi untuk mereka. Terima kasih atas kesabarannya dan juga inspirasi dari apa yang sudah di sesi diskusi sudah ditanya jawab. Baik Bapak Ibu hadirin yang kami hormati, sebelum acara berakhir akan ada acara penyerahan plakat dan juga sedikit goodie bag untuk narasumber. Setelah pemberian itu sekaligus foto bersama terlebih dahulu. I hope you all have enjoyed and benefit knowledge from this event. To all our honorable speaker and moderator, I would like to thank you once again for their valued contribution in this public lecture. Saya selaku MC mewakili tim yang bertugas. Berterima kasih atas partisipasi Bapak Ibu secara offline maupun online yang telah hadir hari ini. Kami mohon maaf apabila ada kekurangan dalam penyelenggaraan hari ini. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Baik, Ibu boleh.
Ya,
Udah ada orang master bagi kita. Nanti dibagi ke kita. Nah,
Triwanto, gimana?
Kita berikan secara ini. Bagi Bapak Ibu sekalian, bagi para peserta kami informasikan bahwa sertifikat akan dikirimkan panitia melalui email. Dan setelah ini Bapak Ibu dapat menikmati makan siang dan telah tersedia di sebelah sebelah kiri Bapak Ibu. Silakan.
Harus kirim ke grup, Mas.
di yang offline aja. Di offline nggak ada emailnya. Bentar ya.
Sama sekalian slide-nya, Mas.
Iya, iya. Bentar ya. Diumumin kali yang nulis daftar hadir, tulis lagi email di sebelahnya. Kan masih ada listnya di luar. Ini ya daftar hadir bukan?
Saya bawa udah tadi karena belum nulis emailnya. Oh,
Nggak ada kolom emailnya soalnya tadi. Iya. Iya sih. Belum ada masalahnya apa fobia. Bentar. Kalau nggak gini aja ya, saya tampilin QR code aja ya.
Iya, di scan aja.
hadir.
Iya, saya mau tampilin di sini. Soalnya belum ada emailnya. Di daftar hadir belum ada email. Belum ada email ya. Saya mau tampilin di sini.
Sama siapa kita beli foto bareng kan?
Ayo foto.
Bapak Ibu boleh foto tidak dulu.
Iya.
Dengan
Udah ditutup sekarang. Oke, saya akhiri ya.